Hello, everyone. Good evening. First, I want to say thank you to the Sunrise Movement organizers for hosting this very important town hall tonight, and I'm happy to be here. I'm Rachel Elfenbein, and I'm going to start off my talk by taking what might first seem like a bit of a detour from Walla Walla and the issue of climate change. I'm speaking on behalf of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, tonight, but I also want to speak from experience. From what I've seen and heard bearing witness to those who experience violence at the hands of their intimate partners. And I promise to tie those experiences to the need for a Green New Deal in our region. Just over 5 years ago, I worked as a domestic violence counselor in Philadelphia. One day, a mother who was a woman of color called me looking for domestic violence shelter. She told me that she and her child had left her abuser. She worked a minimum wage job, but she could not afford to rent a safe home for her and her child independently of her abuser. Instead, they were living in a public shelter that did not have sufficient safety measures to protect them. And I had to deny her and her child safe shelter because the one domestic violence shelter in the city at that time was full. Her story was not unique. At the time, on average, 24 requests for domestic violence shelter in Philadelphia had to be denied every single day because sufficient shelter for survivors and their children did not exist. I highlight this woman's story because it stuck with me. Here she was doing everything to quote unquote pull herself up from her bootstraps. She was working a job, taking care of her kid on her own, leaving her abuser, seeking assistance from services purported to help her. And yet, because of multiple policy failures, our economy and our society failed her. She and her child were just barely surviving. Her story is our story. It is a US American story. The most recent survey from 2018 found that on one day alone, 6,972 requests in the US for domestic violence shelter and housing went unmet. That's in one day alone in our country. In 2019, a full-time worker earning the average renter's wage could afford a two-bedroom market rental apartment in only 10% of US counties. Last year in Walla Walla County, the hourly wage necessary to afford a market rate two-bedroom rental apartment was $18.69 an hour, while the minimum wage was $12 an hour. Half of all renters in Walla Walla and Columbia counties were living in housing that they could not afford. That's half of all people in our region who were renting. At the same time, suicide rates are rising in the US, and suicide is now the second leading cause of death in our country for young people ages 15 to 34. 3 recent studies have found that increasing the minimum wage in the United States would correspond with lowering the suicide rate. So some of you might be thinking, what does this have to do with our environment, our climate crisis, and the Green New Deal? My answer is that these US social, economic, and public health crises are deeply related to the environmental crisis that the Green New Deal is designed to address. As many of you are probably aware, in 2018, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found unequivocally that, quote, without societal transformation and rapid implementation of ambitious greenhouse gas reduction measures, pathways to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. As the story I shared shows, we are facing multiple crises in addition to ecological breakdown. Deepening inequality, precarious jobs, racism, gender violence, hostility towards immigrants of color, the undermining of our democracy, and endless wars make up the context upon which climate destabilization is unleashed. The most vulnerable members of society are hit hardest, first, and suffer the most. Hurricanes Katrina and Harvey and the California wildfires have already showed us this, and the worst polluters largely have not paid the costs of this climate destruction. Corporations profiting from fossil fuel extraction have long campaigned to turn workers against environmentalists, claiming that clean energy would be a job killer. But working class and poor people's quality of life, gravely threatened by climate disruption, would greatly improve in a just transition to renewable energy. And the Green New Deal provides us with this framework for a just transition, particularly for those hit hardest by these multiple crises. Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal plan would launch a decade of nationwide mobilization centered around justice and equity. Climate change would be factored into virtually every area of policy, from immigration to trade to foreign policy and beyond. His plan would reach 100% renewable energy for electricity and transportation by 2030 and set clear goals to fully decarbonize our economy. As the video showed, the Green New Deal draws inspiration from the original New Deal, which mobilized the nation and put 7 million people back to work during the Great Depression. Confronting the crises we face now, the Green New Deal will use full employment as a crucial tool to avert climate catastrophe. Its proposal to meet all of the US's power demands with renewable zero-emissions energy will require coordinated collective action to replace, upgrade, and develop our infrastructure. The jobs to develop our infrastructure will be high-wage union jobs. The Green New Deal calls for free education and training to enable millions of workers to take up and do these green jobs. And this could be a boon for our community college, which is currently struggling, but already has green education programs. Green jobs will be in other critical environmental sectors like regenerative agriculture, soil and ecosystem restoration, environmental impact mitigation, climate adaptation, and reinvestment in an expansion of our national parks and forests. At the same time, the Green New Deal would expand public resources for low-carbon sectors like healthcare, education, and domestic work, because these will be crucial to our zero-carbon economy. A key goal of the Green New Deal is to guarantee a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, and retirement security to all people of the United States. Importantly, the Green New Deal ties together environmental justice with social and economic justice, overcoming a common pitfall pitting environmental interests against workers' interests. It affirms the right of all people to health care and safe, affordable housing. Thus, the Green New Deal can become massively popular because it can improve people's lives in ways that they can understand and that they're willing to fight for. This weaving together of environmental security, social security, and economic security in a broad collective effort is especially important for our region, where we have a housing crisis, and around 1 out of every 5 people in our region is on food stamps. As a society, we can no longer place burdens of climate change on poor and working class folks. Instead, we need to place the burden on the primary culprits, the industries that profit from burning fossil fuels. We need to tax them to fund our necessary decarbonization efforts, and we need policies that regulate firms, requiring that their production does not pollute our environment. This is precisely why we need our government to mandate the Green New Deal. It must be a public sector program, outside of the control of the corporations that profit from burning fossil fuels. Thus, the Green New Deal is also a tool to help us to get money out of politics and strengthen our democracy, a tool to strengthen our democracy. National in scope, the Green New Deal is also about engaging with people locally, addressing their concerns, and improving their lives. It is about building community health, starting with the communities that are on the front lines of these crises. The Green New Deal is a roadmap towards a future that is a public good, and that is good for the public, where nationwide programs could provide free school meals that ensure that no child goes hungry. Medicare for all makes healthcare a human right. Agriculture is ecologically regenerative, and we collectively control our energy systems to provide renewable electricity for all. This is a vision for the ecological reconstruction of our society in which people, like the mother and child I mentioned, would not have to depend on another breadwinner to survive. Through the Green New Deal's just transition, our economy, no longer based on fossil fuel extraction, will be based on care. Care for the environment that sustains us and care for each other and our communities. And if you're interested in DSA, we have a table in the back where you walked in before you came into the auditorium. So thank you.